Sasha Williams stood confidently at the airport gate, her suitcase by her side, and her boarding pass ready. The early morning flight to Washington, D.C. would take her to an important meeting with top military officials, a chance to showcase her leadership and influence. As a high-ranking officer in the U.S. Navy, Sasha had worked hard to achieve everything she had. It hadn't been easy. Every step of her career had been met with challenges, but she had never let anything stand in her way. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, Sasha stood tall and composed, her short hair neatly styled and her eyes focused on the gate ahead. She was proud of how far she had come, and nothing was going to take that away from her. Today was just another day for a woman who had achieved so much in her life. However, as she approached the gate to board, two airport security officers stepped forward and blocked her way. One was a man and the other a woman. Both were dressed in standard security uniforms, but their body language immediately made Sasha feel uneasy. They didn't smile or greet her. Instead, the male officer, a tall man with a stern face, looked her up and down before speaking. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your ID and boarding pass?" he asked, his voice stern and unwelcoming. Sasha was taken aback by his tone. She had flown countless times before, and every experience had been respectful and smooth. She had never been treated like this, especially not at an airport where she had always felt like a professional. "Of course," she said, handing over her boarding pass and military ID without hesitation. "Here you go." The female officer, who stood silently beside her partner, glanced at the ID and passed it to the male officer. He studied it for a moment before looking up at Sasha. "We'll need to verify your information," the male officer said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Please wait here." Sasha stood still, unsure of what was happening. She had traveled for years in her uniform, and never once had she been questioned like this. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a mix of frustration and confusion. Why was she being treated like this? She had done nothing wrong. She had a ticket, she had her ID, and she was simply following the standard procedure for boarding. Minutes ticked by, each second feeling heavier than the last. Sasha remained calm, though her patience was wearing thin. She couldn't help but notice how the other passengers were glancing at her, their eyes filled with curiosity. Some seemed uncomfortable, while others looked away quickly, as if trying to avoid getting involved. None of them seemed to be questioned the way she was. Finally, the male officer returned to her, his face now slightly flushed, as if he had been embarrassed by the delay. "Sorry for the wait, man," he said, his tone less sharp now. "There was a small issue with your ID, but everything seems to be in order now." Sasha nodded but didn't speak. She was still processing what had just happened. She was used to the challenges of her career, but this felt different. Something was off. Sasha took a deep breath and walked past the officers, ready to board her flight. But something inside her told her this wouldn't be the end of the situation. Sasha finally made her way to the gate, still feeling unsettled by the treatment she had just received. As she waited to board the plane, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She glanced around, trying to clear her mind and focus on the task ahead. But the incident with the security officers kept replaying in her thoughts. It wasn't the first time Sasha had faced prejudice in her life, but this felt different. She had spent years earning her place in the U.S. Navy, pushing through every challenge and achieving success. She wasn't used to being questioned this way. She had always been respected for her position, for the work she put in, and for the leadership she demonstrated every day. But today, things had felt off. She had felt like she was being treated like an outsider. Her thoughts were interrupted when the boarding announcement came. She stood up and made her way to the gate, where the same two officers from earlier were standing. The male officer nodded curtly at her, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the uncomfortable moment they had just put her through. Sasha simply nodded back, trying her best to remain composed. She handed them her boarding pass and ID once more. The woman officer checked it quickly and gestured for Sasha to proceed. Sasha walked down the jetway and onto the plane, finally feeling the weight of the situation lift off her shoulders. She took her seat near the window, hoping the flight would offer a moment of peace. But as the plane taxied down the runway, her mind kept returning to the same thought. Why had they singled her out? What had caused that delay and the extra questioning? Was it something about her appearance, or was it simply the color of her skin? Despite the nagging thoughts, Sasha tried to focus on the purpose of her trip. She was on her way to a crucial meeting with senior Navy officers. Her position as an admiral in the U.S. Navy meant that she had earned respect from her peers, both men and women, but today's experience had reminded her that respect could sometimes be withheld based on assumptions alone. The flight was smooth, and the usual chatter of the other passengers did little to distract her. Sasha found herself reflecting on how often she had faced these subtle, yet impactful, moments throughout her career. She had learned to rise above them, to prove herself time and time again. But the question still lingered in her mind. Why did it always feel like an uphill battle? As the plane landed and passengers filed out, Sasha couldn't help but notice that the officers had never made eye contact with her again, even though she had passed through the security checkpoint without issue. It was as if they were avoiding her, and it made her wonder how much of their treatment of her had been based on assumptions rather than facts. By the time Sasha reached the baggage claim area, she was tired of thinking about the incident. She had a job to do, and that job was far more important than what had just happened. She knew that she could continue to prove herself in the meetings ahead, but she also knew that things like this needed to be addressed. She couldn't let it slide. She had to make sure that no one else had to experience what she had just gone through. Sasha tried to shake off the tension she felt from her encounter with the airport officers, but it lingered. As she boarded her flight to Washington, D.C., she felt her body relax as she sank into her seat. The airplane's hum and the soft vibrations made her feel slightly more at ease, but her mind kept drifting back to what had happened. Why had she been treated like that? She had traveled hundreds of times for work, and never had she been singled out in such a way. It wasn't just the delay or the officer's treatment. It was the feeling of being judged based on something she had no control over. Sasha knew that racial biases existed, but it still hurt each time she encountered them. She had worked so hard to reach her position in the U.S. Navy, to be respected for her expertise, dedication, and leadership. Yet, time and time again, she found herself proving herself to people who only saw the color of her skin. As the plane ascended into the sky, Sasha stared out the window, watching the city below shrink into a patchwork of roads and buildings. She tried to focus on the mission ahead, the meetings with high-ranking officials in D.C., where she would be expected to lead and make decisions that mattered. But the unease from the airport lingered, like an unwanted shadow following her. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant said, interrupting her thoughts. "Would you like something to drink?" Sasha looked up and smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Yes, please. Water will be fine." As the flight attendant walked away, Sasha leaned back in her seat, trying to center herself. She had always prided herself on staying calm in difficult situations. She was a Navy admiral. She had learned to face challenges head-on. But this time, something about being judged so unfairly by those officers had shaken her more than she expected. She thought back to the look on the officer's face when he first stopped her, the way he had sized her up as if she didn't belong in the place she had worked so hard to be. But what bothered her more was the quiet assumption that she wasn't capable of handling her business. She was used to being the only woman in many rooms, but never had she felt so out of place in her own skin. Sasha closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and reminded herself that she could not let this affect her. She had important work to do. The country depended on her leadership, and she couldn't let an unfair encounter distract her from that responsibility. By the time the plane landed, Sasha was determined to put the incident behind her. She grabbed her suitcase, made her way to the terminal, and joined the other passengers heading toward the exit. As she walked through the crowded terminal, she noticed a few glances thrown her way, but she kept her head held high. She was an admiral, and she would not let anyone, no matter their assumptions. Take that away from her. Sasha was determined to lead by example, to continue showing the world her worth, no matter how unfairly she had been treated that day. As she stepped outside into the DC air, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't the first time she had been faced with injustice, and it surely wouldn't be the last. But she knew one thing for sure. No one would ever define her or her worth except for herself. Sasha stepped off the plane, feeling the weight of the events from the airport still heavy on her shoulders. As she made her way to baggage claim, she tried to focus on the important work ahead. She had a busy day scheduled. Meetings with senior military officials, presentations, and strategy discussions. But her mind kept drifting back to the way she had been treated by those officers. She couldn't help but wonder if the situation had been handled differently, if things would have played out the same way. As she stood waiting for her luggage, Sasha took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She wasn't about to let what had happened affect her professionalism. She had worked too hard to get where she was to let this injustice pull her down. The Navy had always been a place where she could prove herself, where her skills, her leadership, and her dedication were what mattered. Still, the moment at the airport lingered in her mind, reminding her that people still made assumptions based on her appearance. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant back at the Navy base, reminding her of her first meeting. The text read, "Everything is set for your briefing at 1:00 p.m. Looking forward to having you back, Admiral." Sasha smiled slightly. The work was waiting for her, and she couldn't waste any more time on the past. She picked up her suitcase and walked out of the airport, heading to the car service waiting for her outside. As the car drove through the city, Sasha watched the streets of Washington pass by, the busy life of the city moving forward without missing a beat. The meeting was held in a large conference room on the top floor of a building. As she entered, she was greeted by several military officials, each one standing to shake her hand. Sasha nodded to each one, her confidence building with every handshake. She was an admiral, and today she would remind everyone why she was in the position she was. The meeting started with a detailed briefing on the current operations and upcoming missions. Sasha listened carefully, making notes and asking questions when necessary. As the meeting went on, she could feel her earlier frustration with the airport incident begin to fade. This was her world, her professional world, and she was in charge here. During a break, one of the senior officers approached her. "Admiral," he said with a smile, "it's great to have you back. Your leadership has really made a difference in our recent missions." Sasha smiled, grateful for the kind words. "Thank you," she said, "but there's still much work to be done. We've made progress, but we need to keep moving forward." The officer nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. Your guidance is exactly what we need." As the meeting continued, Sasha felt more and more at home in this space. This was where she could truly lead, where her skills and experience were valued. For the rest of the day, the events from the airport faded into the background as Sasha took charge, guiding the conversation, making decisions, and setting the tone for the tasks ahead. That evening, after the meeting ended, Sasha sat in her hotel room reflecting on the day. Despite the unfairness she had faced earlier, she had proven herself once again. The airport incident had been a setback, but it didn't define her. She had already proven her worth to the Navy, to her peers, and to herself. Tomorrow would be a new day, and Sasha was determined to continue making a difference, no matter what obstacles came her way. The next day, Sasha woke up early, ready for another busy day of meetings and briefings. She was determined to leave the events from the airport behind her, focusing only on the work that lay ahead. As she prepared for the day, she couldn't help but think about how much her career had shaped her. Every challenge she had faced had only made her stronger, and she knew that she would face whatever came her way with the same resilience. Today was no different. After a quick breakfast, Sasha left her hotel and headed to the office for her next meeting. As she arrived, she was greeted by her team, and the room was quickly filled with discussions about the ongoing projects and operations. Sasha felt a sense of purpose as she listened to her team's ideas, her mind racing with ways to improve the plans already in motion. She had always valued collaboration, and she knew that the best results came from working together. Throughout the meeting, Sasha stayed focused, offering insights and making decisions that would move the projects forward. She was in her element, leading with confidence, guiding her team, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. There was no room for doubt or hesitation in this environment, and that was exactly how she liked it. During a break, Sasha stepped outside for some fresh air. The city felt different today, almost as if it was waking up with her. She thought about the encounter at the airport, how it had made her feel small and judged, but she also realized that it had fueled her determination. She wasn't going to let one unfair experience take away her power. She knew that people who made assumptions based on race or appearance were the ones who needed to change, not her. As she walked back into the building, she was met with a familiar face, Captain Ramirez, one of her trusted colleagues. He greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Admiral," he said. "I just wanted to let you know how much your leadership has impacted the team. We've been performing better than ever." Sasha smiled, grateful for his kind words. "Thank you, Captain. It's been a team effort. We're all in this together." Ramirez nodded in agreement. "Your approach to leadership is truly inspiring. It's making a difference here." Sasha felt a sense of pride at the compliment, but she quickly turned her attention back to the day's tasks. The work wasn't over yet. She had more meetings to attend and more decisions to make. But as the day went on, she felt her earlier frustrations with the airport encounter fade away. In this space, she was respected. Her skills were recognized, and that was all that mattered. Later in the afternoon, Sasha found herself in a high-level briefing with top Navy officials. As she listened to the discussions, she realized that her voice was now being heard in a way that she had fought for over the years. She had earned the trust of her colleagues, and her influence was stronger than ever. By the time the meeting ended, Sasha felt more confident than ever. The day had been filled with challenges, but she had handled each one with grace and strength. As she made her way back to her hotel room that evening, she reflected on how far she had come, how many hurdles she had overcome to be where she was. Sasha knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready for them. She had proven time and again that she was capable of overcoming anything that came her way. The following morning, Sasha stood before a room full of military officials, preparing for a major briefing. The meeting was crucial, a chance to discuss upcoming strategies and share her vision for improving military operations. Despite the busy day ahead, Sasha felt at ease. She had faced tougher challenges and had always risen to the occasion. This time would be no different. As the room filled, Sasha noticed the familiar faces of her colleagues, some of whom she had worked closely with for years. She was grateful for their support and knew that their collaboration had always been key to her success. It wasn't always easy being a woman in such a demanding field, but she had earned her respect and trust. That was something that no one could take away from her. When the meeting began, Sasha stood confidently at the front of the room, clicking through her slides. She spoke about new initiatives, focusing on improving efficiency, enhancing teamwork, and ensuring that her team had all the tools they needed to succeed. She kept her tone steady, her words clear. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let anything distract her. As she spoke, she noticed a few subtle nods of approval from her peers. There was no questioning her authority here. Sasha's experience and dedication spoke for themselves. She had worked long and hard to get to this point, and the respect she had earned was evident in every exchange. One of the senior officers, General Harris, stood up when the presentation was over. He walked to the front and addressed the room. "Admiral Williams has done an exceptional job leading her team. Her plans are sound, and her leadership is exactly what we need to face the challenges ahead." Sasha smiled, but she didn't let the compliment distract her. This wasn't about recognition. It was about getting the job done. She had learned early on in her career that praise was fleeting, but results lasted. And that was what mattered most. The rest of the meeting passed smoothly, with further discussions about upcoming projects. Sasha participated in every conversation, offering her insights, asking important questions, and guiding the room toward the best solutions. By the end of the day, it was clear that her leadership had made a significant impact. Her ideas were being adopted, her approach embraced. After the meeting, Sasha was approached by several colleagues, all expressing their appreciation for her leadership. One officer, Captain Simmons, looked at her with admiration. "Admiral, your ideas are exactly what we need to move forward. You've really set the tone for our next steps." Sasha nodded, acknowledging the compliment, but kept her response focused on the work. "We still have a lot to do. We'll need to stay focused and keep pushing forward. The work never ends." Captain Simmons smiled. "You're right, but with you leading the charge, we'll be ready for anything." As the day came to an end, Sasha reflected on the progress she had made. The challenges she had faced over the years, both in her career and personally, had only strengthened her. And despite the earlier encounter at the airport, she was more certain than ever of her worth and her place in the Navy. She knew that people would continue to make assumptions, but Sasha also knew that those assumptions didn't define her. What mattered was how she carried herself, how she led her team, and how she continued to fight for the things that mattered. As she left the office that evening, Sasha couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had proven herself once again, not just to others, but to herself. And she was ready for whatever came next. Sasha woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity. The events of the past few days had stirred up emotions, but today she was determined to put everything behind her. She had a job to do, and she was focused on getting it done. The early morning light streamed through the curtains, and as she got ready for the day, she felt a sense of purpose. She was exactly where she was meant to be. As she drove to the office, Sasha thought about the airport incident. It had bothered her, of course, but she had moved forward. She couldn't let one unfair moment define her or hold her back. She had earned her place, and nothing would take that away. Arriving at the office, she was greeted by the familiar faces of her team. They had been working tirelessly on their current project, and today was a pivotal day, one that could shape their next steps in the mission. Sasha felt a rush of energy as she walked into the conference room. She was ready to lead, to guide her team through the challenges ahead. As the meeting began, Sasha was in her element. She spoke with confidence, offering ideas and solutions to every question that came up. Her mind worked quickly, analyzing the data and considering the next steps. She knew the importance of every decision and the impact it would have on the mission. Every moment counted, and Sasha had spent years honing her skills to be prepared for this kind of leadership. The discussion was intense, with many ideas being proposed. At times, people disagreed, but Sasha managed to keep the conversation respectful and productive. Her team respected her not just for her position, but for the way she handled every situation with grace and professionalism. She listened to everyone's opinion, taking in all the information before making her final decisions. After the meeting ended, Sasha took a moment to reflect on the progress they had made. The team was moving forward with a clearer vision, and she had guided them through the complexities of the project. It wasn't always easy, but that was the nature of leadership, making tough choices and staying focused on the bigger picture. Later that afternoon, as Sasha sat in her office, she received a call from an old colleague, Captain Roberts. "Admiral," he said warmly, "I just wanted to say how much I respect the way you've been leading. You've made a real difference, and I know I'm not the only one who sees it." Sasha smiled as she spoke. "Thank you, Captain. It means a lot to hear that, but we've still got a lot of work to do." As the day wound down, Sasha made her way home, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The earlier frustration with the airport had faded into the background, replaced by a renewed focus on her work and the positive impact she was having. She knew that there would always be challenges ahead. There would always be people who questioned her based on assumptions or biases. But she also knew that her actions and her leadership would always speak louder than any judgment. Sasha had worked hard for her position, and she would continue to prove herself, not just to others, but to herself. Every day, she showed up, gave her best, and made a difference. That was what mattered. And as she looked ahead to the next challenge, she knew she was ready.